Hey everyone, I've got a really cool conversation lined up for today's episode. I've got Matt Lee from Pax8 on, and today we're going to be talking about this concept we've seen in the industry, specifically in the MSP space, but also in the general IT sector as well, the concept of deploying always-on remote access software to every managed endpoint, and whether or not that's a good idea or not. So Matt and I, we spent some time talking through the specifics of that. How would it function better? Why we shouldn't be doing it in the first place? We even dive into some things like GIA, the concept of least privilege, and lots of other great risk assessing and security topics throughout today's conversation. Hope you enjoy. Well, everyone, welcome back to the next episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got Matt Lee from Pax8 with me today. How's it going, Matt?
Man, what's going on, brother? It's good to be here. I appreciate it.
It's great having you. I've watched a bunch of your stuff out on the interwebs over, the last year or so. You and I met at some channel event in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's a whole different story.
Yeah.
But ever since then, I'm like, Matt would be great to have on the show. So I'm excited that you're here, Matt. I appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us.
And we had matching, chairs, right? So that's
right. We do.
Yeah,
so it works. It works. So, but before we kind of dive into our topic for the day here, Matt, so for those of our listeners that may not know who you are, can you give us a introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a recovering MSP. I like to tell people.
Recovering MSP.
Yes, recovering MSP. I don't know how recovered. But ultimately, I started out as a break-fix technician, number 7, in a small under $1 million revenue MSP. And for 11 years, spent time going from break-fix technician to project lead to tier 3 tech to, chief technology or director of technology. And then at some point they gave me this sticky note that said, space and security, right? Director of technology and security.
They tacked it onto the end of the
literally
title.
Just on the end of my title. It was great. And then ultimately we grew to be, merged to be a over 20 million revenue managed service provider, and then exited a $40 million revenue managed service provider. And during that time, we got punched in the face really hard. And when I was director of security, I was there as we lost through an acquisition we call Voldemort, because I'll never say their name again. We lost quite a bit of money and revenue and time and effort in a mass ransomware event of the clients of that organization for 1,200 endpoints, and lived that life for 18 months. And then ultimately got to build with some of my best friends the coolest and most secure managed service practice as we grew that until we exited, and something that I'm still quite proud of to this day. And now I spend most of my time doing this kind of stuff and helping educate and drive other MSPs to be successful and win. I guess is the best way. So all the way from technical to leadership and driving things forward evangelically, if you will. So that's me. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. It's great to have you here. I mean, the background is perfect for today's discussion, right? And especially since you've lived the MSP, or heck, any IT organization, you've lived the worst case scenario, it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
Mass ransomware events, nobody wants to deal with that, period. So
true story.
Yeah. And the fact that you've lived to tell the tale is, well, we're going to have some good conversations today. And of course, that kind of leads into our topic of today's show. And it's funny, one of your live streams in the last, this was around when the ConnectWise ScreenConnect vulnerability was fresh. I want to say it was a month or two back now. Don't quote me on that. But
it feels like that, but it probably wasn't even that long ago, right?
I know, right?
It's like a month when it's been 2 weeks.
And that's the thing with cybersecurity is when this stuff happens, it simultaneously feels super long ago, but not that long ago at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, man. It's
right.
I said it the other day as living through the incident I went through. I called it as perpetually proximal, right? Or basically it was always yesterday,
right.
Even though it feels like forever ago, it was always present, if you will. But good point. But we were talking about with Tom Lawrence and Jason Slagle. We were doing a live stream about the vulnerability, and one of the concepts I think you were about to bring up that came up was, should MSPs always have persistent access
Right.
to their client environments, right? That's the question I think you wanted us to banter around today.
And as soon as I heard that, listeners of the show know that I spent a good chunk of my career in the MSP space. And I mean, in my younger days, I just kind of accepted that was the model. That's how we do things, and as
Sure.
I've gotten older and I've kind of focused more on security, now it's like, you know what, that I get that's the model, but to be honest, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? I mean, from a security perspective, from ease of use, it's great. It enables that MSP model. Don't get me wrong, folks.
And maybe this is the real take. I don't know that I agree with that. I think maybe what you could unilaterally say, and maybe I'm wrong. Prove me if I'm wrong out there, y'all. Reach out and say something in the comments. But you could unilaterally say even those that have done it certainly never did a risk assessment of should they have done it, right? If I put in this RMM and then always persistent remote access tool and always persistent, all these things that give me access and full control and the ability to run things, the exclusions to my Sentinel-1 for my RMM, those things, when they put these things in, I bet none of them have done an assessment that can prove to someone and say, here's why we chose to do that, even though we knew the risks and what the impacts and the benefits would be. And because of the outweighing and value of the benefit, we chose to take on the risk of the impact. I would wager there's not MSPs out there, for the most part, that would answer this. At least the bell curve, 85% would not be able to answer that question. I think that's the more important part to take on. Isn't that should I or did I, or those are all individual decisions. And to your point, that we talked about before show is it's about the profit. Yeah. It's about scale. It's about those things, and those choices are made. They're just made in a vacuum of the risk, in my opinion.
Right.
I think that's what's playing out. So
definitely. And I mean, what's that?
Not to jump off on a tangent.
No. It's relevant. It's relevant because I put my MSP hat back on. I mean, every business has an obligation to grow and profit, right? And I mean, in order for MSPs to do that, you have to bring on more customers, you have to scale, it has to be easy, you have to enable that very simple, tier 1 support experience. And, I think you and I were talking about this yesterday. When you call up Mary or Bob in accounting and you're trying to walk them through, go click here so I can get remote access to your machine. Wait, no, what do you mean? I click this over here. No, everybody's had that experience, right? Trying to get somebody to enable their side of a two-way remote connection, right? And I definitely see why we ended up where we are today, just because of that, right?
And we did it under the guise, and maybe if we zoom out and think about the shifting nature, we called it white glove experience, or I want that best user experience. I want to be able to connect and fix your problem in 5 seconds, not in 30 seconds. And, those were the things, those are what we told ourselves, and they're all true statements. But then we get into what is the cost benefit, and we're saying, okay, well, I'm saving 3 minutes of waiting while Bob or Bill or Sally fumble around, and I'm going to then make that much faster to get ticket resolution on my SLAs and how great the experience is. Great. What if you approached it differently? What if instead of maybe deploying an endpoint agent on for everything and always having this always on ScreenConnect or always on whatever it may be, not saying ScreenConnect's bad or anything, I just mean always on some persistent remote access, then what if I said I have this other agent that already has the ability to do stuff rapidly? What if I could deploy ephemerally through some operational methodology a ScreenConnect agent? Maybe I already know this machine is needing some help and I know that it's coming up in the ticket queue. Maybe my system automates deploying an endpoint agent that then gives me access to that in a demand session, right? Then I can use it and I get the same outcome, but I've approached it in a risk-reducing way. Why? Well, now I've chosen that my attack surface must be this RMM and the operational processes, not necessarily a vulnerability in this software, because that software is only deployed for a second and then comes back and is ephemeral in its nature. And I'm not making an advocation for any, one way to deploy something. Just simply look at the risk of it, look at the benefit of it, and then try to find ways we can creatively reduce that attack surface in either its time that it's available, in the nature of it. Like maybe I don't even use that. Maybe at some point I'm in a vision where I'm using a Microsoft Remote Connect, right? And I'm using it through Intune Type 2 license or whatever the secondary license is for Intune, which gives me that Remote Connect capability. And maybe I'm doing it that way. Or all the way back to your point, of this always on and what developed our condition to get here really is this understanding of trying to make a white glove experience as this first statement to what if we started thinking about the security impacts, and instead of reducing it from 30 seconds to 2 seconds, or 3 minutes to 2 seconds, we're reducing it from 3 minutes to 30 seconds.
Right.
And we're having to wait that extra 30 seconds to say, I'm going to connect, but my system's deploying the system I'm going to connect to. Anyways, I've hit it with a barrage, but yeah.
No, I think that's a valid point, because like you said, the example, take it from 3 minutes to 30 seconds. It's still a massive improvement. And I would argue that the benefits of not getting pwned by a threat actor is worth the difference, right? Is worth that 3 second to 30 second difference.
Yeah.
Easy choice there, definitely. And I think the other area where I've seen, how do I want to say it? Another area where I have seen some choices be made for the MSP along these lines would be like in those highly regulated environments. So we've been using ScreenConnect as an example here, right? Again, not picking on ScreenConnect, just using it as an example, given, it was one of the last big ones.
Makes
Anyway.
sense. Yeah.
So let's using ScreenConnect as as an example. If I go into a new prospect as an MSP, let's say they are involved in the DoD supply chain in some way, shape, or form. I don't know, maybe they make screws or something. I don't know. They probably have to adhere to ITAR or CMMC, right? And, in those situations, they're going to have their own internal IT staff. They're probably going to have a compliance officer or somebody who's, in charge of compliance within the organization. And you mentioned remote access to them, and they're probably going to raise their eyebrows and start asking a bunch of questions, right? And I've seen situations where the remote access question was decided for the MSP by their customer, right? Yeah. And so a variation of this conversation I've seen is where I have seen some MSPs that, we have a couple of, I'll stick with this example. We have a couple of DoD-related customers, right? They have to adhere to ITAR and CMMC. Maybe we as the MSP should do that as well. Just that way we can say that, hey, we are ITAR and CMMC compliance, and follow the best practices and procedures that go along with that framework, right? And like I said, maybe that makes the remote access choice for them. But I think the overarching point for our conversation so far is, it's a choice that needs to be scrutinized, and they need to do a risk assessment on whether that is a true necessity for their MSP, right?
Well, and I think you nailed it, right? It is making a decision and asking the questions. You said it several times, right? The customer now coming in and trying to deal with 800.171, or to your point, CMMC level 2 as an extensibility of their, defense industrial based contract. Things to that nature are starting to drive the conversations that are saying, maybe we need to ask these questions. Those questions then often answer, to your point, the dictation of whether or not I'm going to use a certain remote access tool, or whether I'm going to use remote access, where I'm going to store confidential, controlled unclassified information of CUI, where I'm going to store FCI, federal contract information, where I'm going to store. Those things are all going to come into kind of that decision of what I do and what I don't do. But in unregulated markets, the questions aren't even being asked.
Right. True.
And I think that the point is the question is what matters, is that you as an MSP, if I was listening to this, what is my takeaway? Go back and look at each tool that I use, anything that gives me access to my client surface, and ask the simple question of, do I need this? Do I need this ephemerally or not? Right? If I need it permanently, if I always need some base of operations, right, then maybe one answer is yes, I need this permanently, and I'll use this to deploy as infrastructure the other things I might need or not need, right? Like I probably always need backup software. I probably always need backup infrastructure.
Yep.
I probably need that to be running as a constant basis if I have the need to back up things, right? And so you have this balance of what can I do ephemerally, what can I not? And as you take that away as an MSP, always be assessing what are these things that I can do? And what we're talking about is a concept called JIT-GIA. And JIT-GIA stands for just in time and just enough access.
Yep.
Right? JITJEA, just in time, just enough access. And the concept is, do I need it, and when do I need it? And how much do I need? right? And those things really get into like, okay, do I always need to be a complete admin? And there's a giant fail of this as a case study, right, of JITGIA. The way that Microsoft deployed DAP or delegated administration permissions was universal. If I was an MSP of 697 Microsoft tenants, which I think was the count we were at, then I had to give one of my 170 technicians access to all 697. If I added another person, it was all 697. Another person, 697. Another person, 697. The problem was that meant that I did give way more access than was needed because they only needed to access this one tenant.
Right.
Which now, as you see this come full circle, and I was part of a lot of this early advisory side, Microsoft has GDAP or granular delegated administration permissions, which now says I can give Johnny in Team Bravo in Dallas access to Team Bravo customers. And then for just in time, I can use PIM and PAM, right? Or privileged access management, privileged identity management type methodologies to say, I'm going to make Matt an admin to this group of Team Bravo customers only when he needs to be, right? Only escalating to that point when I need that access at that moment of time.
Yep.
So JITGIA as a concept is an extensibility of principle of least privilege, which is trying to give people only the things they need to do their job. Now we're saying only the things and only at that right time. Now as a threat actor, I actually have to target you not only contextually correct, meaning I need to be the right person and persona that has access to this.
Right.
I now also have to be contextually correct at the right moment. Or have the operational capability to escalate into those administrative. Like it might not be something automatic. I might have to do an ask and go, hey, you know how to do the truffle shuffle, right? Like you got to do the truffle shuffle and like, sorry, a little throwback there, but right? Like some kind of identifying move has to be part of that operations that a threat actor just may not follow. And so I guess my takeaway in this first segment, of kind of these case studies beginning, right? The beginning of this, what should MSPs take away is focus on risk, and assess things in that way of, can I look at this from a JITGIA lens, right? From a just-in-time, just-enough access lens in that regard. Okay.
I think JITGIA is not talked about enough in the industry. I think, I go way back, 20 years ago, everybody wanted to be super admin, right? Or domain admin as it was back in the
No, I am root. Sorry. That's
right. I am root. Exactly. And turns out that's not very good for security, right?
Oh, no, it's really bad. Yeah, it's not good.
Funny how that works.
Good. Funny.
So, well, we've kind of talked about the problem, right? And I think, I don't know, the way I've always learned that has always worked well for me is, looking at examples, right? Sure. And I mean, we can go back to the one that kind of, created the whole idea for this episode, and that is the ConnectWise ScreenConnect vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Now, in ConnectWise's defense and in the community's, maybe I shouldn't say defense, but to the community did accolades. A really good job. Yes, accolades. I like it. We'll go with that. ConnectWise and the community were fantastic about communicating the threat, communicating the fix, getting the news out there. I would be hard. And
words matter. So let's say communicating the vulnerability, right? Because a threat is a kinetic motion, someone actively attacking me.
Correct.
And so I would say they did a great job of communicating the vulnerability and then a great job of communicating the threat as it started to actually happen, as we started using these use cases and examples of things actually playing out. I think that both the community and everybody did well. But to your point, like what happened? Let's just TLDR it. You had a vulnerability that allowed a threat actor to gain total admin access in two different ways, right? One is just setting myself up as a user, as an admin, and taking over the user table, and one as a remote file inclusion and remote path type traversal capability, which allowed me to do certain things that kind of crafted those two together in some really cool things. But ultimately, I could go run commands on all your machines. I could go run commands on all your machines where you had this permanent access. That was the 10. And you know what it took? They called it slash and grab for a reason. It only took a front slash. If you put a front slash after setup.aspmx, you could literally take over, and that's still viable today if you're at least not patched, which God bless, I haven't run my script in a while, but I hope we're there. But there have been other examples of this, right? You like to think of this as that horror moment of a threat actor could take over and do something bad, like deploy ransomware at a root level on a system I've probably excluded because I use it for my own stuff. I'm not signing certs. I'm not signing scripts. I don't have the ability to say only execute the code I've signed sovereignly. You're not doing those multiple layers. And so I'm going to use this as a threat actor to destroy you. But think back to SolarWinds in December of 2020 with the major SolarWinds event in Solarigate, I think it was called, right?
Right.
As this extensibility. And then you even go back most recently to MoveIt. If you wanted to talk about something that escapes the MSP land, but something that I've personally been threatened to be sued over, right? Because I was actually finding MoveIt vulnerable servers by doing a favicon hash search. Thank you, Cody Kretzinger, for the idea. He helped me out with that. We just did a search of the favicon hash through a scripted Shodan interaction over API. And we're finding those servers and then trying to reach out and notify either their vulnerability teams or other people that they had vulnerable servers that were out there, quite likely.
Right.
And anyways, but this isn't just limited to, by the way, posting on LinkedIn with their name of the company that doesn't respond is not well received. Just so you know, it's not well received.
I can't imagine why.
I don't know. Maybe it's, hey, my sister would like to have a conversation with you in the next 12 minutes. I digress. But it got the point across. But
right.
But I learned as an older man now, 6 months later, a year later, that that's not a wise move. But I digress. But no, this isn't limited to just MSP land, right? That's something that you were talking about before the show, is that this is universal. What makes it more poignant with ScreenConnect is that it is one-to-one you and every one of your clients.
Right.
If you are using a ScreenConnect, and I don't want to bash on them, any of the ScreenConnects. The other thing I want to get back to is there's a reason CISA has a mantra, secure by design and secure by default. And the reason for that is it has not been advantageous for people in capitalism. And I have this theory called the middle theory that says people, products, and services don't often get more mature than the maturity of their consuming entity. They don't stay far above it, and they don't stay far behind it and stay in business. Right? If you make a better spoon, and you're not willing to pay me for a better spoon, there is no capitalistic benefit in me spending money on making a better spoon. And so when you think about software, there's been a lot of executives say, Matt, a lot of money's made on shitty software. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong.
Very
they
true.
would rather prioritize the next feature out the door than ever recoding some piece of shit made 10 years ago.
Yep.
Right? So you get in that world where we are living with mediocrity at best and probably well below mediocrity when it comes to most software. And so when you start talking about this of like, why is this a problem? It's not a ConnectWise problem. This is a capitalism and world and global problem. Even when you take the other challenges, I'm not trying to say capitalism's a problem. God bless me. I love making some monies. But my point being is that this is a global problem where technology always gets adopted in our lives and then ultimately solved down the road and regulated and managed down the road. We're not in this phase yet. So when you talk about like, why do we have to deal with these major risks and why are we looking at these things with this tenuousness? It's because I don't trust it. I don't trust them. I do expect the failure. If I was looking at a likelihood versus risk, my likelihood is high that something like this is going to happen. So how do I deal with it? I have to reduce what that impact would be, whether that means reducing less time of having that on the asset, which one I choose might be a way of reducing that impact. Those type of things might play out. The ways I govern them. Maybe this can't run execution and commands. Maybe this can't. Oh, the problem was with the ScreenConnect vulnerability, I was admin and then I could just turn that on, right? So there's the downside to that. But maybe I haven't put a hole in my anti-malware, but instead I've signed my scripts that I'm running. And so now my anti-malware will only ignore the scripts that I run that I've signed. And maybe I don't sign those in my RMM where it's easy and part of the process and convenient. Maybe I have another method. So I think it's about time that we as practitioners get more mature and start to think about these things in that way. And now when you say I have ScreenConnect on every machine, you have a justified reason. The business outcome outweighed the risks. You've thought about them. You've mitigated them. You've put what you can in place, and you've done what I call reasonable cybersecurity, right? Which is just meeting that. If I gave 12 other people in that jury box the ability to make this decision, would they find my actions to be reasonable given the same inputs, the same pieces to play with, the same game board in front of them? Did I act reasonably? And being able to say, why did you have ScreenConnect? I don't know. Man, it was just easy, and I remembered it as a young man. That was the right way. Versus, well, I actually have looked at this, and our risk profile said that the speed to market is so important that we still have it, but we've mitigated it with using SSO. SSO's tied to certain identity surfaces. We've limited access. We patch on the like that kind of stuff. We stay on the threat feeds from people like ConnectWise when they tell us about it. We pay for our license update. Man, not to get off on a tangent, I did security research on the ScreenConnect vulnerability, and I'd been watching a cohort of 1,000 servers, 461, I think it was, that were alive. over the course of about 5 weeks after this vulnerability was notified. Like we were still seeing 30% unpatched, like still up and running, pretty constantly for most of that last few weeks, right? Like it was
right.
just bad, man.
And you
so
were doing that via Shodan, I'm guessing.
I pulled it from Shodan initially to get a subset, a cohort of those. And then after that, I just did a curl. Jason Slagle helped me with some of the scripting. It was just one-liners that would curl each of those servers on a cadence and then see how many responded, parse their responses, and then sort their responses based on the header. There's a vulnerability also that I'd speak on in this secure by design part, where maybe you don't show your version in the response header. So I can just
it seems like it would be a smart thing to do.
A reasonable thing to do. Where I can't passively or semi-pass, not passive, but where I can't just gather it without doing anything illegal, like just curling it isn't illegal. It's when I then take something and do something afterwards. So you would force the adversary to do something illegal and kinetic in order to figure out if the server itself is vulnerable, in my opinion. But that notwithstanding, back to your point of case studies, if you believe it reasonable that your systems are going to be compromised, you're starting to live a tenet of zero trust, which is assume compromise.
Yep.
And as you start thinking that way, when you are assuming compromise, would I always leave an always on connected to the lifeblood machine? Like, would I always leave this like kill switch connected to grandpa's like machine in the wall? No, probably not. Maybe I won't actually walk in the room to pull the plug, right? Like maybe there needs to be some physical protections to this.
Yep.
And yet here we live today. Sorry to get off on a tangent, but
no, you keep saying tangents, but this is all relevant to the conversation, and I think something that you said, really kind of stuck out to me. And that was like, I think it's time for us in the cybersecurity space to become more mature, right? And some people are going to groan when I give this example, but for some reason it made me think of this. Do you remember when Microsoft added Windows Firewall to all their operating systems? Right, for inbound and outbound traffic. This was years and years
Windows
ago.
7 or right?
It's been a while, maybe? Right? Do you remember the outcry, the groaning and complaining of your average sysadmin? Maybe it was just the circles I was in, but I remember
I was NetSH set disabled firewall, right? like straight up, I remember.
Yep. And so, where I'm going with that is like. Arguably,
I guess that would be service control. Sorry, y'all. Like I'll tell on myself. I got that one wrong. Anyways, it'd be SC. Okay, I'm done. No worries. I'm done ITing now. I'm no more nerding.
No worries. But my point where I'm going with this is like, arguably, we look at that choice now, Microsoft's choice to put Windows Firewall in place inside of their operating system. Arguably, that was a good choice, right? Because it starts protecting us from things like, lateral movement in some cases on a threat actor inside of the network already. Arguably, it was a good thing. And guess what? We got over it and we got used to it. And now it just kind of works now when you're kind of looking at we just expect that Windows Firewall is there and we go about our day, right? So I feel like it's time for us to get to that point with some of these other security concepts, zero trust, JIA, and the other things that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, where does that risk lie? What I mean by that is like I was with a prominent professional, head of identity for a very large player that maybe rhymes with Microsoft or something. And we were talking about how all of the indirect providers and all of the partners had a very low percentage of MFA adoption. And the question was asked, well, Matt, how can we help them be better? Can we make this MSP not be so stupid? Like not necessarily in those words, but this very condescending approach of why don't they be better?
Right.
Why don't they be better? And the argument I pushed back was, what if I turn this around on you? Why don't you make it where you can't not have MFA enabled? Why is it that you don't force it?
Yep.
And the same argument was, oh my God, we tried once and partners lost their stuff. They pushed back. It was so hard. It was like, my argument and the reason I'm bringing this up isn't to shame this fictitious company, but really just to say that we all are in this together and it's a rapid maturation curve that some of us will survive and some of us will not. And I think there's going to be a lot of decisions made. And one of the things I'll reach out to is like in the ScreenConnect situation, there were some very, very bold decisions made. One, they gave away licenses to upgrade to people that hadn't paid memberships, almost calling decriment by people. That's
Right.
number one. Number two, they stopped people that were checking in with old license servers from functioning. This is the first time I know of this in history. They actually said, if you check in with an out-of-date version, we're going to return back no license. And when we return back no license, you won't be able to execute commands. You won't be able to remote connect. In fact, you said before the show, people don't even know they have a MoveIt server somewhere. Same thing happened with ScreenConnect. I reached out to a good friend of mine at the former company that I was with and said, hey, man, you're in charge of control of central services. Have you patched yet? And he's like, man, I patched 5 minutes after they released it. I knew about it. I'd already been told about it. Like, I was ready to go. We're done. All of our 6 corporate servers. Great. 2 days later, he's like, Matt, I think we have an incident going on. What's going on? We actually had a ScreenConnect server that one of our companies we bought 5 years ago actually had sold to a customer they were managing for themselves, and they actually have an incident, and we don't have an agreement. We like think about that. Like, my point is, you said it before the show. Kevin put this in 5 years ago. He no longer works here as of 2 weeks ago, and nobody knows about it. How do we deal with that? Well, Control 2 says you should have a better software inventory.
Yep.
Control 1 says you should know about the asset it's running on and understand its function and purpose. You start getting into, there are CIS controls that lead us down all of these paths that solve all of these problems at a tactical and operational level if we'd simply follow the prescriptive guidance.
Exactly. I think that brings me to, you know, kind of the part of the show where we start wrapping this up and is like, okay, what's the takeaway, right? And I think, you know, one, to kind of hammer on the previous point, like, we need to start being more mature. But like you said, all of these threat avenues have got, you know, controls that are out there in the industry already. We need to start following the controls and have the maturity and the mandate to go out there and start putting these controls in place. And I'm going to say it again, the maturity to follow them, right?
Yeah. I'd add one more thing to this too, and I say this to everybody. Has anybody ever gone through getting fit in their life that's listening, right? Or have you ever gone through accomplishing something that sounded really, really hard, whether it be in your brain, whether it be as a project, whether it be as whatever? It seems insurmountable, and at the beginning you suck. Like, that's the straight up reality of it. And if you expect to be perfect at the beginning, you're probably going to be failing, and you're probably going to have unrealistic expectations of grandeur. And the reality is if you think about this, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You are going to suck at delivering controls. You are going to get it wrong. You are going to fail. You are not going to be perfect. All you have to be willing to be is iterative. All you have to be willing to be is humble. All you have to be willing to be is willing to understand where I failed yesterday so I can be better tomorrow, which means you have to accept that you failed yesterday. These are things that are our fundamental flaws today of getting there. And I say all that to say, when you're going to implement something and say you're making the decision to look at your tools with a risk-based approach and you want to do all these things, letting yourself see the whole project is more of a problem than taking small bites, small steps, working towards the resolution, and then making it better and better and better. And when you come back to reasonableness and defensibility, having that journey, being able to tell that journey is a hero's journey. How else is someone else going to say you could be reasonable? You had these 500 steps to take. Here's how I took them and when I took them. Yep. You go take this 500-piece puzzle and put it back together in a better way. Right. Like that's what I'm getting at here is that, you know, I'll call it tangential, but obviously on a pulpit would be a better description. I think the takeaway is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Go out there and improve and get better over time. And be humble about that improvement and where you are in your state as you assess it. That's my takeaway. And
I think to tie it back to our original talking point for this episode, and that being, you know, the question of should we have always on persistent remote access software on all of our managed endpoints? That's part of that conversation, right? That's part of having that maturity to at least ask the question, is this needed? If not, how am I going to set up some sort of ephemeral means to, you know, spin it up when I need it and tear it down when it's not needed, right?
Amen.
So definitely.
Let's go build a fort and kick it down together, brother. I think that's
right.
The solution to this.
That's right. There we go. There's a Fortnite joke in there somewhere. I'm not sure what it is yet.
It'd be my play. You just have to film it for a minute or two.
That's right. That's right. Well, Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and chit-chat with us. It's good having you, my friend, and hopefully we'll have you on for a future episode.
Awesome, brother. keep fighting the good fight.
Definitely. You as well. So those of you watching, thanks for spending some time with us today. If you found value in today's episode and you're watching on YouTube, we are available on YouTube if you're not aware of that. Be sure to, as they say, smash that like and subscribe button. There we go. I screwed it up.
Man, I made mashed potatoes out of that smash.
That's right.
Discussion.
That's right. We are available on all the major podcasting platforms as well. So chances are, depending on where you consume your content, we are there. You can also find out more about us at hornetsecurity.com. You'll find links to the podcast there. With that, we'll let you go. Have a good one out there. Stay safe. We'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Have a good one.